So today is for us to explore why making changes to our behaviour, our decisions, our lifestyle, and today specifically in the context of self-care, because that's what the month's about, why it can feel so difficult. And now I don't know whether you both saw the image that I posted in the group, but it was an image that I posted with some parts missing. So today we're going to consider ourselves as parts, 4 parts in particular. And the picture that I posted was with 1 part included and the other 3 parts missing. And really it was just to see what thoughts came up for people quickly. And I think people said, the other parts emotions, which my answer was yes. But also the main thing really in the image was that the arrows went round. So we're going to talk about these 4 parts of self because quite often my experience is that people tend to have less awareness in some parts and more awareness in others. So when it comes to changing our behaviour, our lifestyle, if we don't have awareness of all 4 parts of ourselves, then we're missing some vital information that we can use in order to be more successful at the changes we're trying to put into place. So today is almost like a preparation live for next week's, because next week's we're going to talk about our belief system and the impact that our belief system can have on these 4 parts. So this is like the foundation stage, if you like. So if I start then, in the image that I posted, if you've not seen the blog or you've not had the email, because they've got the full images on them, in the image that I shared in the group, cognitions was the only part that was included out of the 4 parts. And in a top-down approach, kind of speaks for itself, starting at the top of the body and working the way down, cognitions is where it all starts. There is another approach, which is the bottom-up approach, which is using your body first. But for the purpose of this one, we're going to just do the top-down approach. And so it all starts with our thoughts, our cognitions. So cognitions and thoughts speak for themselves, don't they? But what actually are they? So it's where a lot of people talk about our inner voice and our internal dialogue. I talk about internal dialogue quite a lot, and that would be in that part of ourselves. So the voice that sounds like us, that tells us what not to do and what to do, what we should and shouldn't do. It's that part of us that has conversations with people instead of actually having conversations with people. So we access our fantasy thinking in that part as well. Let's just say we've got conflict to attend to, and then if you're anything like me, what you might do is rehearse it a couple of times first, and that's all part of your cognitions. Ruminations, so when we get stuck in a cycle of thinking about the same thing over and over again, that is part of our cognitions. And our belief system, so the beliefs that we develop through our history, and particularly our childhood, about ourselves, about others, and about the world. So how everything comes together, how we get our needs met, what we can expect from people, rules of the world, and that's what forms our belief systems, and that's all in cognitions. There's so much that I could and want to say about belief systems. So hopefully once we've done this, you'll tune in again next week or watch the replay where I'll really delve into that, because our belief system have a huge impact on what we allow ourselves to do, and particularly in the context of growth and how we develop. Being gentle with ourselves, calming the internal dialogue, the inner critic inside us that gives us a bit of a tough time unnecessarily. I say a bit of a tough time. Some people give themselves a really tough time, but we'll cover that in one live in isolation next week. So for the purpose of this then, I mentioned the arrows that go through from cognitions, and then where they go, any cognition will set off an emotional reaction. The emotional reaction being, the general list of emotions that you can think of, such as sadness, worried, our anxiety, our depression, our feeling helpless. I know I mentioned some of them in the live last week about how our body becomes very attuned to the familiar emotions that we feel. So it's understandable then why it's important for us to be able to be aware of our emotions. Now, if you are aware of your emotions, if you're kind of nodding along and saying, yeah, I'm aware of my thought processes, I'm aware of my internal dialogue, I'm aware that I might have conversations and I kind of make scenarios up in my head and then use those to decide whether or not I'm going to do it or not, using your fantasy thinking. You might be nodding along, and then if you say yes, and emotions, obviously I'm aware of my emotions, well, sometimes it's not always the case. Our emotional bank, if you like, or our emotional intelligence isn't always available to everybody. And I think it's an assumption that we all develop quite a linear development in this area. So I'm talking to you as adults, but this is also applicable to our children. Sometimes when we see a deficit or we see our children challenged with emotion, we can start to think about what is wrong. And it's not necessarily the case. It is like a muscle. So if you do sport and you train your legs over and over and over again, your legs are going to be stronger than your arms. And it's the same thing, that if through your development, if through your interactions with adults when you were younger, your attachment figures, with the people that you form relationships with in your teenage years, and with partners that you've had in adulthood, if those relationships invite emotional content, reflection, if they invite you to explore and express, then that's you strengthening your emotional muscle, if you like. And if it didn't happen when you were younger, then sometimes people are quite disconnected or unaware of their emotions. And that can happen for a number, like a large number of reasons, and it's not one rule for all. Hi Lucy. If our parents are struggling with some emotional distress of their own, so let's talk about kind of emotional trauma from their past, it might be that they don't bring, as parents, a lot of emotional content to the table. Then that has a knock-on effect, because our ability then to be with emotion and engage and have it almost developed and teased out of us is thwarted, because our parents would have a limited capacity to engage that way. But also, if the child lives in a chaotic or abusive environment where feeling is unsafe, then they are not going to invest in training their emotional muscle, in developing, in being seen with emotion. If for people that are criticised for crying, it's not uncommon for them to have a real challenge accessing the crying or even feeling the sense of sadness, because it hasn't proven to be an advantage to them in their development. Therefore, it becomes untrained and underdeveloped. The language as well is underdeveloped. Empathy, self-compassion is underdeveloped. So when we talk about meeting our own needs, sometimes that is a genuinely big challenge for people that have little or not much awareness in their emotional part of themselves as maybe their cognitive part. Let's go back to the diagram. So we've got cognitions and then we've got our emotions. That then flows into our physiology, so our body, and the sensations that we feel within our body. Let's think of somebody that has anxiety. I think it's safe to say that we've all experienced it or know somebody that experiences anxiety. And when that emotion is really high, like anxiety often is, what I often experience from my clients is a desire to turn their back on what it feels like to be anxious. Is this ringing a bell? Feel free to share your thoughts with me, and what I'll do is I'll just keep checking and dipping in and out and referring to that and building on it if I can. So like our emotions then, whereas our emotions aren't always advantageous for us to be seen with and to express, we might disconnect. Also, the sensations that the emotions create in our body may be so uncomfortable and scary even. You think about panic attacks and how people feel as though they're dying and having a heart attack. People want to turn their back on their emotion, and then what we often speak about is the pushing down of emotion, and hand in hand what comes with that is pushing down the sensations in our body. In the blog that I posted, so what I'll do is I'll share it in the comments afterwards if you've not managed to catch it, I use an example of feeling hunger and feeling cold, because they are sensations in our body and they're quite generic. I think we can all accept that. Many of us feel those. But when I was in my training, what my trainer said to me was about a client that they worked with, and how all of a sudden in the middle of the session the client stood up and was like, right, it's lunchtime, I've got to go eat. And he was like, we're in the middle of a session. And it was about that person was so dysregulated and so disconnected from their body that they didn't feel hunger. They used the structure of the day to inform them when they needed to eat. And so some people may be watching this and just thinking, you know, they're kind of obvious parts of ourselves, and I'm not disagreeing, but the degree to which we can all be aware, that we can all comfortably pay attention to and feel safe with is varying dramatically. So when we have a cognition, it triggers an emotional reaction, and then it filters through our physiology. What comes then is our behaviour. And we can assume that if we have access to all four parts of ourselves, and we're able to then draw information from our mind, our emotional content and our body, that what behaviour pops out as an output is informed. So it's informed by our needs, sensations and our desires and our urges, and all internally, totally out of awareness. All these four parts of ourselves have a little dance, and out pops this behaviour that serves us really well. Who experiences it like that though? Often very few people do. And I believe that it's because of how much or how little we spend in these four areas. Just popping back to physiology a minute, because one thing that I did leave out there was that our physiology, so the sensations in our body, in contrast to the top-down approach of using your cognitions first, that when some therapists work with clients from a bottom-up approach, so using the body first, and that's really useful if you are very aware of what your thinking is. It's a way of getting you to turn your attention inwards to your body. So sometimes what happens is I say, you know, we're kind of in a dialogue with a client, and I might say, as we talk about this, what is it that this is evoking? Like, how do you feel about it? And they'll be like, it's understandable that I feel like that, or nothing, or I don't know really, it's just a blankness. What I might notice is that the body's doing something. So I might notice that they're doing this, that they're doing a rubbing, or that they're kind of stroking, tickling their thigh, or a very common one for high energy or a way to displace emotional discomfort is, you know, the tapping of the leg, when people kind of rock and the whole table's going and you can feel it on the floor. And so what I might do then is draw attention to the body, so that's the bottom up approach, and so if we was able to give your foot or your leg or your hand or whatever it is that's tapping a voice, what do you think that would tell us? And quite often it's deflected because we put a lot of energy in keeping ourselves safe and walking down the familiar routes that we've walked through our history. Oh, I always do that, might be the comeback. And that's very true. Often they do always do that. But when we look at about the reasons into why people do that, what they're trying to defend from, and what their challenges are in being able to lean into an immersion, as opposed to what I talk about, the example that I gave with somebody that's anxious is quite often what they want to do is push it down and turn their back. The thought of noticing their body even more can be quite terrifying. So it's done with pace and with a very gentle pace, but you can see then how the body can be happening. Something in the body can be happening and a person might disconnect from it. And it always serves a purpose. So as I'm talking about this, and if this is starting to resonate, I want you to be gentle with yourself. And I know that some people don't know what that looks like. So I want you to be aware that the way that we develop, the way that we learn to spend time and awareness with those 4 different parts of ourselves all come from survival. And whilst that sometimes sounds really extreme to people, the need to survive, like I remember when I first started therapy, and I at that time genuinely was there just because I was in training, and I had to have 4 years consecutive therapy. I remember saying, I'm just here because of training, parents are still together, had a happy childhood, everything's fine. And I think I spent the next 6 months crying because I was so unaware of the choices that I was making and how I was doing them for beliefs that I didn't know I had. The things that I was doing, my behaviour was very much engaged in avoiding the emotion that felt uncomfortable. So my survival when I was younger wasn't about life or death, but it was about how to get my needs met as, for example, the oldest, how to feel a sense of achievement, how to be told that I've done a good job. And so whatever your pattern, whatever areas you are or aren't able to engage in, it will reflect how you needed to get your needs met, to feel value and to exist in your environment. And it's not about criticising our parents because they all have a limited capacity. The very essence of this group is to share information and make you think so that you can integrate it into your parenting, so that you can take what you need and then you can pass it down to your children again. Because I know that through conversations with my mum, for example, one thing she says is they just didn't have people that talk the way that you do when you were small. And she believes that she would have been a different parent if she had had a support service such as this and other therapeutic parenting techniques and gentle parenting approaches and stuff. So when I say I want you to be gentle with yourself, it's about hearing me say that whatever our limited capacity is, whatever parts we're not necessarily connected with, that all served us well at one time in our life. You at once were totally out of awareness, granted, but very creative in adapting to the dynamic of your family. I'm just going to read the comments. Yeah, so Lucy just shared that she often rubs or scratches her neck, and that's something that her husband notices, and that's great, isn't it? So sometimes when we're disconnected, what we find is that other people notice before we do, which is really interesting. I'm a definite leg tapper. That's something that I always, particularly if I'm angry, because I like to sit and process it. So while I do that, I can just send it out to the edge of my edge of my body and tap my leg while I process it. And my mum says the same. Yeah. And it's interesting as well, because as we become more self-aware of those different parts, what happens is that we can start to see our parents in our habits. So it might be that the way that our parents learn to deal with intense emotion, for example, or something like anger or disappointment, that they learn a particular way of doing it, and that it, out of awareness, gets modelled. And out of awareness, we almost, kind of swallow it whole. So when I talk about the cognitive part of ourselves that we hear the do's and don'ts in, quite often that's our parental do's and don'ts, the things that we've explicitly heard verbalised and the things that we've seen and interpreted. Last week I was talking about the nervous system, and now nervous system speaks to other nervous systems. So when other people are in shutdown or on high alert, hyper and hyper, often we sense it, don't we? We might not be able to put our fingers on what it is that's happening, but we sense something, we pick up on it. And it's our nervous system, this kind of like totally non-verbal way of communicating, as well as body language and facial expressions and other people's discomforts, and it's all stuff that we pick up on. And when there's been a rhyme or purpose in our childhood, quite often what we can do is we pick up on it and we make it part of our own, and we make it fit as we go on. And I'm noticing that I'm starting to go into belief systems a little bit, so I'm going to pull back and just stay with where we are. Without these parts of ourselves then, when we're trying to create change, for example, eat healthier or do more exercise, put boundaries in place and say no, there is so much involved in that. And that's why the title, when I scheduled the live, was Why Self-Care is More Than What We Know. Because we do know. We know what we're supposed to do more often than not. We may not know how we're supposed to feel on the back of those positive things if that's not a place that we've been in. But generally, it's the information is readily available, and we do know the things that we need to do. But we have pieces of the jigsaw missing. How annoying is that when you're doing a jigsaw? And granted, I only do like big piece jigsaws with 4-year-olds. But it's still annoying when there's a piece missing. And I guess even with a jigsaw, the piece missing is more obvious than if we've just got a lack of awareness in one of our parts. That's less obvious. And we don't know then that we need to find it, and we don't know what to do to find it. We don't just get the other jigsaw boxes and start looking for the missing piece, do we? Because quite often, because it's out of awareness, we have no idea that we're needing something else. We need to bring something else to the table to make the changes that we want to make more successful. And this is why this is all really important for me to cover on the lead up to Alice Godfrey, the nutritional therapist that's going to come and join us in the last week of August. Because I don't want what she says and what she shares to be another, I know that, oh yeah, I do need to do that, that's right. I want you to be able to use the things that we've done, the ways that I've got you to think, to be thinking, what else do I need to do as well as eat better? Because, people yo-yo diet for a reason, because the beliefs are like a computer program that are operating behind the scene. You can have a blank screen and look like there's nothing on there, but often there's something happening. I'll get a notification on my phone, for example, saying this app is draining your battery, and I'm like, I've not even used it today. Like that, our belief system is always on the go. And if it's out of awareness, we don't have choice. But when you start to be confronted about the way that you're thinking and start to look for reasons why, not just taking for granted, I am who I am, that just happens. But when you start to look like, why am I like that? What purpose could that be serving? And if you can't find the answer, then maybe if you look back in your history, why might the way that I do that be of value back then? And we can constantly develop so that you can see that in order to give yourself a fighting chance of managing your lifestyle, finding a work-life balance, feeling less overwhelmed so that you can be more present with your family and your children, then this is something that I passionately believe that we need to consider. On the back of that then, so what I'm going to do in the units, this video will be added, but you will also find what I often encourage clients to use, which is an experience log. It's a PDF, just something I created on my own, and it is these parts of ourselves in a table, and on the first page what you'll see is that I'll give examples about how to use it. So our behaviours and what that might look like as you're writing down. And how I'd like you to use it, if this is of interest to you, is to take some time regularly, daily ideally, however I know that that's not always